We're told in the Bible that the end time will be like the days of Noah. When we go back to Genesis chapter 6 and read about those days, we find that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and took unto themselves wives. And from their unions came giants. What are we looking at today? In this generation, Gary Sturman is here to discuss with me the mystery of the fallen angels.
And it's a mystery, JR, which I think lends a lot of fundamental knowledge to prophecy, and we'll find that out as we go on. I want to read 1 Peter 3:18 and following. For Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit, by which also he went and preached unto the spirits in prison, which sometime were disobedient, when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was a-preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water. Noah preached 120 years while the ark was being prepared. And JR, there were spirits, disobedient spirits, roaming the earth in that day. We read about them, as you mentioned, in Genesis 6. There are also secular legends that take us back to that day. The old gods of tradition and folklore, I'm talking about Zeus and Apollo and all those Greek gods. Were these figments of man's imagination, or did they really exist? Well, the evidence says that there really were demigods, corrupt people from on high who infested this planet. And if you read Genesis 6 carefully, it says that that's why God had to destroy the world with a flood.
In order to save the genetic purity of the human race?
Exactly.
That's a fascinating thought. In the days of Noah, these sons of God saw the daughters of men, took them wives. Just how prevalent was this problem? Is it possible that, let's go back to that generation. We're living on this street, and there's neighbors on either side, down the block and around the corner, and a couple of angelic creatures have come down, and they have taken wives, and they live across the street and down the block, a couple of families there, and their children are human hybrid offspring. Would you be able to recognize them? What do you think, Gary? Would the people there be able to recognize them?
You know, this is an interesting thought, JR. Maybe not. Now, we might think, well, yes, if in fact that these corrupt people were, as Josephus says, the Grecian giants, in other words, the mythological giants of Greek history, then it looks like you would be able to recognize them. That is, they would be mighty men.
Recognize their children, recognize the offspring as they grew up and became giants.
But perhaps not the angels who were masquerading as human beings. I see your point, and I think it's a good one, that when angels come to men throughout the rest of the Bible narrative, they just come as ordinary-looking human beings. The angels that came to Abraham are a good example. The angels that came down to Lot's house were mistaken for ordinary men.
Now, Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. Is Jesus coming soon?
I think so.
Is it possible then that there are fallen angels living among us today here on planet Earth?
JR, the evidence, I think, is very strong, both prophetically and by way of evidence, various evidentiary material that we're reading about these days. That the fallen angels once again are beginning to torment mankind.
In the book of Revelation, we find the bottomless pit being opened.
Yes.
And creatures coming out that torment men for 5 months. Is this the ultimate goal of Satan and his hordes? To eliminate the human race, to corrupt the DNA structure of humanity and take over the planet?
Well, it seems to have been before, and the Lord says in the Olivet Discourse that it's going to happen again. In other words, the days of Noah will be repeated. We know that when those fallen angels came the first time, and took wives. That's exactly what they did. They corrupted the human genome to the point that if you take the Bible narrative literally, Noah was the only man who was found perfect in his generations. And that word generations means literally his genetics.
Genetically pure from Adam.
He was genetically pure from Adam.
Had not a hint, not a touch of impurity from these fallen angels.
That's right.
But all of his neighbors had problems?
It would appear so.
In the book of Noah, in the book of Enoch, which is an apocryphal writing, there is the story of how Lamech felt about his newborn son Noah. Now, this is not a biblical narrative here, but it certainly gives us some indication of what early civilizations thought about the problem with the fallen angels in the days of Noah. Tell us about it, Gary.
By the way, Jude quoted from the book of Enoch in his own day. Jude, the half-brother of the Lord Jesus Christ, in the book of Jude. We have here this narrative in the book of Enoch. And after some days, my son Methuselah took a wife for his son Lamech, and she became pregnant by him and bore a son. His body was white as snow and red as the blooming of a rose. The hair of his head, his long locks were white as wool, and his eyes beautiful. And when he opened his eyes, he lighted up the whole house like the sun. The whole house was very bright. And thereupon he arose in the hands of the midwife, opened his mouth, conversed with the Lord of righteousness. And his father Lamech was afraid of him and fled, and came to his father Methuselah and said unto him, I've begotten a strange son, diverse from and unlike man, and resembling the sons of God of heaven. And Lamech was afraid, J.R., and he ran away from the sight of Noah. Now this is we've got to call it an apocryphal tale.
Yes, but this bit of folklore here indicates that Lamech was afraid that his son was the product of a fallen angel.
Absolutely.
And so, as the story goes, Enoch is questioned about this, and what does Enoch tell?
Well, Lamech goes to Enoch. Enoch gives a very long prophecy, which we don't have time to read, but it concludes this way. And now, my son, this is what Enoch says, go and make known to thy son, Lamech, that this son, that is Noah, which has been born, is in truth his son, and that is no lie.
In other words, he really is human, and he's all the way from Adam. Genetically pure. Basically, that's the gist of that story.
That's the gist of the story, that they were reassured that Noah was genetically pure, and he really is your son, Lamech. He's not the son of one of these fallen angels. Now, we've got to emphasize that the context of the book of Enoch, from one end to the other, is the falling of the angels and how they corrupted early man. So this story fits very well.
The interesting thing about this ancient story is that Jesus said it would happen again in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. Now, when the angels came, Gary, they came to corrupt mankind with an arcane knowledge. Could you read us about that from the book of Enoch?
Now, this is from the book of Enoch, right after the part, by the way, that's quoted by Jude. And it names the fallen angels. I won't bother to read all their names. But they came with different branches of knowledge for mankind. For example, I read in the book of Enoch 8:1, and Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth.
Now this was a fallen angel.
A fallen angel named Azazel. Another fallen angel named Semyaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. That'd be herbalism.
Drugs.
Drugs. Another fallen angel, Amaras, taught the resolving of enchantments. Now, I don't know exactly what the resolving of enchantments is, but it sounds like going into a trance and doing trance channeling is what we would call it today. Barachial, the name of another fallen angel, taught astrology.
Wow, I taught them astrology.
Kokabel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds, that is, the weather. Arachiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel, the signs of the sun. And Sariel, the course of the moon. Well, I could go on, but you get the idea. Here are these fallen angels that brought man knowledge in exchange for something, and that is, shall we say, the right to intermarry with your daughters and to produce offspring.
Wow. Now, can you feature this? Azazel taught men how to make weapons of war.
Right.
And then the other angels you read about taught men how to use drugs.
Drugs,
and enchantments and astrology. In other words, devil worship.
Sure.
Set up a form of worship to worship them, the fallen angels. Wow. There's more. We'll be back in just a moment. Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. At the end of days, and I believe we are there, the world is going to be similar to the way it was in the days of Noah, when the sons of God came down to the earth to corrupt the human race. And there is one particular way they are corrupting the human race. Gary, tell us about it.
Well, one particular way, that, in fact, the main way they corrupted the human race the first time around was through illegal knowledge, as we have seen, knowledge of things like enchantments and the use of drugs, sorcery, astrology.
And war-making tools.
War-making tools, etc. And false worship. But here in the book of Enoch, the angel who taught war-making is specifically named. He's called Azazel, and it says, and I'm quoting, "Thou seest what Azazel hath done, who hath taught all unrighteousness on earth and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven, which men were striving to learn." Now that's important.
I think it is very important, Gary. Notice, please, he said he taught them unrighteousness. Mankind, situated in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, were simply told to serve God, and it took the devil coming down and beguiling them to sin. And there's no telling what all Azazel taught them to do.
Yeah.
All kinds of unrighteousness.
Unrighteousness, and I think what we might call high-tech sorts of things today. I think
Yes.
we would be shocked to learn
The secret things.
the secret things. Who knows, maybe they knew how to fly and taught men how to build flying machines. Now, we don't know, because all this was lost when the world was destroyed by water. But men were taught secrets they weren't supposed to learn, and of course they were dying to learn those secrets.
Now, Gary, we live in the age of knowledge explosion.
Yes, we do.
In fact, the implication here is the knowledge explosion that is occurring today is inspired from the other side.
Forbidden knowledge, could it be? You know, J.R., there are people today who have written long books documenting UFO studies as demons. They have, to my satisfaction, pretty much nailed down the UFO problem as a demon problem, dark spirits from on high. Paul spoke of them as principalities and powers and rulers of darkness. They come at night like lights in the sky, and they're bent on doing evil business. But you know, certain people who have been involved on the inside of this have said that there have been occasions in which men have learned evil secrets from those UFOs that they were not supposed to learn, even high-tech secrets. And there have been several books written about this. And I can't help but reflect that this is exactly what's happening again today.
Well, this type of study will take us into strange realms.
Yes,
we don't
does.
have time to get into it today, but perhaps in programs in the future, we'll be able to be a little more specific. Let's talk about Lucifer, who was once a cherub, and his connection with the king of Tyre. Is it possible the king of Tyre had a father that was not of this world?
You know, J.R., this brings up a question about demonic infestation in general. We know that in the ancient Canaanite civilizations, that those people were utterly consumed with demonology, demon worship, the powers that had to do with enchantments and astrology. Idolatries of all kinds. And so when it makes sense that the pagan king of Tyre who is used as an earthly model of Satan, by the way, that pagan king of Tyre may well have obtained much of what he knew.
Yeah.
His knowledge of building and construction, seamanship, architecture. I'm thinking of the ancient Baalbek Acropolis, the temple that is said by modern architects to be unbuildable using modern technology today. Where did these people get all this knowledge, if not from fallen angels?
In Ezekiel chapter 28, we are told about the king of Tyre, and it brings it right down to say, "Thou hast been in Eden, in the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl," and others. He goes on to say, "Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God, and hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day thou wast created till iniquity was found in thee." Well, Gary, the problem with the human race all down through history has been with Lucifer.
Lucifer, and the word iniquity, by the way, simply means a spirit of law breaking. Lucifer broke every law in the book, so to speak, and I'm convinced that he and his fallen angels broke a divine law, which is they brought forbidden knowledge down to mankind. And man willingly received it. We would demonstrate this over and over again. For example, we have in Genesis 11, after the flood, the Tower of Babel was built. And men obviously wanted to build that tower to reach heaven. Now, what was on their mind? Well, they remembered back to the days before the flood, and by handing down this knowledge from that day, they remembered. Well, you know, the angels used to visit our ancestors, and look at all the wonderful things they brought. You know, we should rebuild this connection, this tower, reach to heaven, reestablish that broken connection, and get them down here once again so that they could teach us what they taught our relatives back before the flood. And God said, no way.
Amazing.
He confused their language.
In Isaiah chapter 14, we have the other verses about Lucifer. "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." And that has been Lucifer's plan, his program for corrupting the human race ever since.
And J.R., when God made the first human couple, practically in the very next sentence you have the dragon showing up in the garden, the serpent, corrupting humanity. What was he doing? What was his motivation? Well, he wanted to be Lord of humanity. And he said, if God can make it, I can rule over it. And essentially that's what he decided to do, and he ruled it by corrupting it, and I think his fallen angels are merely imitating what he started out to do.
Amazing. Now, there are some other things I want to read about. In Revelation chapter 4, we find the cherubim around the throne of God, and there were 4 of them. Is it possible Lucifer was once a 5th cherubim, a cherub?
J.R., I believe that there's every bit of evidence that there were 5 cherubs. Now there are only 4. We find them around the throne room in Revelation. We find them mentioned by Isaiah, and we find them mentioned by Ezekiel. And they seem to represent man, the predatory animals, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the air. They have 4 faces. But the missing face is the reptile, the cursed reptile who fell. And you know, J.R., at one time on this planet, the dominant race was the reptilian race. The giants of this world were all reptiles.
Yeah. And they were giants, too,
They were giants. And they disappeared, and I am convinced that their reptilian leader, who was created a reptile from day one, he's called that old dragon, that serpent, from before the foundation of the world, they lost their leader when he fell, and their race was reduced to nothing, to a bunch of dust crawlers, basically.
But they are still around.
They're still around.
And we see these creatures, these little bitty creatures, and They're not as big as they once were.
Not as big as they once were.
But the battle's not over yet. They're soon going to, that is, their leader is soon going to make himself known. You see, Lucifer once ruled the earth.
Yes.
He wants to rule the earth again. And this time he's planning to do it through his seed, the Antichrist. And since we live in the last days, I am personally convinced that we do, then we should be able to see these machinations of the dragon and his ilk.
And J.R., I believe we do. Enoch says it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied that in those days were born unto them beautiful daughters, and the angels, children of heaven, saw and lusted after them and said to one another, come, let us choose wives from among the children of men and beget us children. J.R., that is so perverted, so unclean, so evil as to be beyond describing. And it happened in the days of Noah. Jesus said it's going to happen again.
Is it already happening, Gary?
I believe we can see the early traces of it right now.
Wow. Is it possible that there's somebody lives down the block from you who's not of this world? That's a thought, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly a thought, J.R.
Or are there people in high places who are not of this world? We'll be back in just a moment. As it was in the days of Noah, well, this mystery of the fallen angels is beginning to surface. We're beginning to understand it a little better, I think.
And J.R., there's so much history surrounding this. For example, the book of Jubilees says, and against his angels whom he had sent to the earth, he was very angry. He commanded them to be uprooted from their dominion, and he told us to bind them in the depths of the earth. Well, you know, Peter talks about these fallen angels being bound in Tartarus. Mm-hmm. So we have biblical narratives, we have historical narratives, both Jewish and secular, that really corroborate this story.
Mm. Fascinating. You know, in Genesis chapter 6, it says there were giants in the earth in those days and also after that, which means that there were fallen angels coming down to earth even after the flood.
Yes.
Wow. Well, it's a subject to be explored. This is J.R. Church and Gary Stearman. Until next time, keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current programs on audio tape. Or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on videotape. For either order, add $3 for shipping and handling, and to order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.